The millionaire's son insulted the maid, but his father taught him a lesson he would never forget. Grant Thomas sat back in his chair at the posh restaurant, grinning smugly as he watched Lily Harper approach. Her simple attire was accentuated by the intense light from the crystal chandeliers, and she appeared out of place against the polished, glittering decor. Lily's eyes darted tensely around the room, and she fidgeted with the strap of her old pocketbook. Grant's friends, seated around the table, barely concealed their amusement with knowing glances. "Grant, what's the deal?" Lily, in a barely audible tone, inquired. She had accepted his offer, defying her better judgment. Perhaps there was a tinge of kindness in his offer, but she felt like she was walking into a trap now that people were chuckling and gossiping. Grant leaned forward and beckoned for her to take a seat, grinning without opening her eyes. "Come on, Lily. Order a seat." "Whatever you like, it's on me tonight," he said in a tone full of fake generosity. She noticed the eyes of the affluent diners surrounding them as she sat anxiously. When Grant's pals saw her reach for the menu, they started laughing mockingly. "Check the way you pronounce it." They all laughed again when one of them made fun of Lily. Lily went red in the cheeks from embarrassment. She tried to concentrate on the menu, but tears burned in her eyes. That's when she realized this dinner had nothing to do with genuine kindness. To Grant and his companions, it was a performance, a way to minimize her. A waitress came to collect their orders. Grant leaned back with a smug look on his lips, clearly taking pleasure in Lily's suffering. With a sarcastic tone, he raised his glass and winked at his friends, who also raised theirs in a mock toast to exciting new experiences. Lily struggled to control her emotions and contrived a tight smile. But just as the server began to bring the wine, a powerful, authoritative voice cut through the humor. "That is adequate. Grant." The table grew silent as Richard Thomas Grant's father materialized next to them. He looked down at his child, a tall, powerful man, and his expression was serious. With a sudden cessation of laughter, Grant sat up straight in his chair, his haughty demeanor melting under his father's serious gaze. "Father, Richard raised a hand to hush Grant as he staggered. "I've got enough of this absurdity." Richard spoke in a cold tone. He looked up at Lily, who gave him a confused, wide-eyed look. "Lily, you don't deserve any of this. Permit me to apologize for what my kid did." Grant's friends exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware that the mood had shifted, that no one ventured to disagree with Richard, and that his presence required deference. Lily nodded hesitantly, her voice almost audible, not sure what to do. "Thank you very much." Mr. Thomas Richard turned back to face Grant, his eyes growing cold. "Grant, you completely disregarded other individuals in addition to embarrassing yourself on family tonight." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I think you should mature and learn to be more modest." Grant felt a flood of anger and shame run down his cheeks. He had never seen his father so disappointed in him, and it stung to realize that, "You are not a serious person." He looked around at the curious observers and moaned. "I understand," Richard answered emphatically. "I am." He addressed the whole table, making sure they could all hear him. "This is how you will work as a janitor with Lily for the next 6 months. Maybe then you would know what it takes to be respected in your eyes." The restaurant erupted in shocked gasps, and Grant's friends looked at him bewildered yet amused. "You can't make me do that," his father said, and Grant struggled to understand as his expression shifted from rage to shock. As he argued, his voice was nearly a whisper. Richard's expression remained unchanged. "You will either become wealthy or forfeit the family's wealth. Subsidies and custom-picked luxury items are discontinued." Grant felt the pressure of his father's command mounting up against him. He glanced at Lily, whose expression was a mixture of confusion and relief. He saw for a moment the pain in her eyes, the embarrassment she'd felt because of what he'd done, and for the first time, a hint of shame showed on his face. He forced a firm swallow, knowing he really had no choice. "Okay," he muttered between gritted teeth while keeping his gaze fixed on the table. "I will see to it." Richard nodded sharply at Lily, who softened in expression. Lily, I truly apologize for what transpired with you tonight. If you are willing, I would appreciate your patience with Grant in the next months. Lily nodded, continuing to process everything. I'll do everything in my power. Thomas, Mr., and that's it. Richard shot one last look at his son before leaving the restaurant, leaving Grant to face the repercussions of his own actions. The laughter and jeers that had filled the room minutes earlier vanished, leaving only a tense silence. Grant turned to look around and saw his friends for what they truly were: harsh, shallow, and unworthy of much respect. The evening was coming to an end. Despite her embarrassing encounter, Lily walked out of the restaurant with a proud expression. Behind her, as Grant sat there gazing at the empty dishes, he became aware that a remarkable event was about to occur in his life. The morning after, Grant woke up in his lavish bedroom, the previous night's events replaying in his mind like a bad dream. He stared at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that his father's words were nothing more than idle threats. But as he looked through his phone, a single message from Richard confirmed his worst fears. Your responsibilities begin tomorrow. Get ready at 7 in the morning. Give no justifications. Grant cast aside the phone and uttered a whispered curse. The fact that this was happening to him astounded him. Beside the woman he'd tried to insult was a janitor who worked there. The thought made his blood boil. He was the fortunate child, the one with boundless opportunities. He was not deserving of this. Still, he knew deep inside that his father was determined. Richard Thomas did not make petty threats. If Grant disobeyed, he would immediately lose access to the money supporting his lifestyle. He thought of the trips, the private clubs, and the fancy car in the driveway. The realization of how quickly everything he'd taken for granted could vanish sent a shudder down his spine. When he finally succeeded in dragging himself downstairs, Richard was waiting for him in the study, a room filled with weighty antique coins and leather-bound books. Richard looked up from his desk, a serious expression on his face. Grant, I trust you, and I know you take your work seriously. Richard got things started early enough to stop any more discussion. More importantly, you have ashamed this family by treating another human being with an unbearable degree of contempt. Grant clenched his jaw and averted his gaze from his father's squinted eyes. Dad, I already promised to do that. Are you really rubbing it in my face? Grant muttered. You think this has to do with getting punished? No. Grant, this is about discovering that, despite your hereditary wealth, you have spent your entire life believing that you are better than individuals like Lily. It's time to have a fresh perspective on the world. With a bitter laugh, Grant couldn't quite believe that this was actually occurring. You think that making me clean floors and empty trash cans will change me? It involves more than just labor. Richard responded in kind. His tone is severe. Perhaps he is trying to teach us the value of respect and humility. You may realize that money doesn't truly define what is truly valuable. Grant shifted uncomfortably, the remarks hitting closer to home than he would have liked to admit, but he refused to let his father see past his mask. All right, Dad, you win. I'll follow your short lesson, no problem, but I won't be having fun. Richard shook his head, a trace of disappointment flashing in his eyes. This is not a place to have fun. Grant, it's related to growing up. The following day, Grant arrived at the mansion's service gate at precisely 7 a.m. as instructed by Richard. The sun had just begun to rise and the morning air was peaceful and chilly. He stopped in front of the door, feeling rather out of place in his fancy jacket and polished shoes. Surrounded by the peculiar clamor of the morning shift, Lily appeared moments later carrying a sack full of cleaning supplies. She seemed surprised to find him there, and her eyes examined his attire with a hint of humor. She advised you to think about dressing more sanely, even in the way she spoke. But Grant sensed a hint of irony. He looked at her, but his eyes were not burning. He knew he deserved better. Yes, he said, taking up the plain outfit she'd handed him. It seemed strange to wear something so simple, devoid of the prestige and labels he was used to flaunting. Lily led him around the mansion and demonstrated the tasks he would be performing. They strolled by the tastefully decorated rooms and elegant passageways. A knot of bitterness developed in Grant's chest. He'd lived in this house all his life, but he'd never really thought about its hidden tunnels, servant quarters, or other features. Upon arriving at the storage room, Lily handed him a mop and bucket. "Let's start with the basics," she stated. Her voice was grave as she talked. The floors of the East Wing still require cleaning. Grant looked down at the mop in his hand and felt a surge of anger. He had never had to do this before, but he knew Lily was watching him closely, and there was no way out. He made himself start dipping the mop into the soapy water, despite the fact that he felt every ounce of shame with each swipe across the marble floor. It's admirable that Lily didn't make fun of or gloat over him. She just worked next to him, moving quickly and efficiently, and giving the task at hand her whole focus. Grant could not help but notice the quiet resolution that permeated her motions. She approached everything with a purpose that eluded him. By the time they finished the first section of the wing, Grant's arms ached, and he had beads of sweat on his brow. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. "This is nonsensical," he whispered as he turned to face Lily. She shrugged and wiped her hands on her apron. "Salutations from my cosmos. Grant, it's not ostentatious, but it's real." Her remarks were hurtful, but they weren't malicious. They were just a fact of life that he couldn't help but notice. For the first time, Grant realized that he had taken a lot for granted in his own life, and that he knew very little about folks like Lily, those who work very hard every day without expecting anything in return. The day continued on and on. Grant struggled to meet the deadlines for the jobs. Even as Lily glided through them with a practiced ease, he could see her staring at him, as if to see if he would break under the pressure. His pride, however, kept him from giving up. Grant was filled with gnawing frustration. Since this was not the life he was accustomed to, every muscle in his body revolted against the new reality. By the end of the shift, his back ached and his hands sore from scrubbing. He had never been more tired. He saw Lily leave the home, though, her head held high. Despite the significance of the day, Grant felt a strange, uneasy tug at his chest, something that almost felt like respect. He shook off the thought, clinging to his resentment and fury. But as he made his way home, he instinctively felt that this was only the beginning of a journey he hadn't planned on taking. Grant experienced agony in areas of his body the next morning that he had no idea could hurt. He lay in bed for a short while, reflecting on how absurd his situation was. He felt driven to leave even though he knew it wouldn't be financially realistic to walk away to save his father's punishment. No more trust fund, no more overly severe extravagance. With a frustrated moan, he hauled himself out of bed and got ready for another day in his new world. By the time he reached the service door of the mansion, Lily had already arrived and was waiting, carrying her bag of cleaning materials. She gave him a little nod, but other than that, she remained silent. There was no attempt to lighten the mood, no courteous banter. There was an uncomfortable, oppressive quiet between them that Grant felt but could not quite figure out how to break. Lily handed him his uniform without a word, and he changed fast in the staff lavatory, emerging in the baggy work clothes that didn't look appealing on him. As he joined Lily in the corridor, he noticed a mirror of himself in a gleaming glass cabinet. He was no longer the sharply dressed man, but simply another employee carrying a mop and bucket. What he saw stung his dignity, but he knew there was no turning back, so he pushed himself to swallow the hurt. "Let's start in the West Wing today." Leading the way was Lily, whose polite yet seemingly indifferent tone made Grant wish she would show even a hint of the contempt he knew she must be feeling. Then, if nothing else, he could explain away his anger, but she treated him with the same level of skill and detachment as any other task. They worked through the morning. It was difficult for Grant to keep up. He stammered on the marble floor, tripped over cleaning solution, and nearly toppled a vase. Every time he erred, Lily would calmly correct him. She never screamed at him or lost her temper. If anything, her tolerance made him feel more uncomfortable. "You are aware that you don't need to hesitate," Grant muttered once, massaging a painful spot on his wrist from nearly dropping a heavy bucket. "I'm sure you would want to chastise me." With an unreadable expression, Lily glanced at him. But would that truly help? She answered a simple question, then went back to work, allowing Grant to consider his own thoughts. Grant's initial fury gave way to a different kind of dissatisfaction as the hours went by, one that was aimed at him. He had never thought of hard labor as something above him, but now he realized how physically demanding it was. His arms ached from mopping floors, and his back ached from bending over all the time. By midday, he was so sweaty that his hair was stuck to his forehead. During their lunch break, they sat in the cramped staff area where the other workers joked and spoke among themselves. He ate in silence, paying little attention to Grant. She glanced at Lily from time to time, who seemed perfectly at ease in this situation, and she ate her simple sandwich with quiet focus, clearly thinking of something else. Grant had to ask after a while, "What do you do every day?" Lily glanced up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. "What steps should you take next?" Grant gestured vaguely around them, pointing to the cleaning supplies, the dull walls of the staff room, and the refrigerator in the break room that operated in this same manner every single day. Day off. She gave him a long look before answering, as if deciding whether or not he should know the truth. "I don't have a choice. Grant, my mother needs on me, and no matter how hard things become, you find a way to keep going when others need you." Her statements surprised Grant, and he was at a loss for words. He had never been made to think that way about anything or faced with a scenario where giving up was not an option. He regretted not having given it more serious thought. He had never truly considered what it meant to be struggling every single day. The beautiful mirrors that lined the halls were polished, the plush carpets were vacuumed, and the chandeliers in the grand ballroom were dusted. In the afternoon, more cleaning was done. Grant worked in silence, trying to push past the fatigue that pulled his body down. He kept his eyes fixed on Lily, watching her rhythmic movements, as if she had already accepted the burdens he was only now beginning to recognize. As the day was drawing to a close, Grant leant against the wall to catch his breath. Though he hadn't intended to say them, they came out without warning. He added, quietly surprising himself with the honesty of the statement, "I didn't know it was this hard." Lily paused, her eyes tenderly examining him. Grant nodded, not sure what more to say. She responded, "It's not easy, but you learn to deal with it in life." For a brief while, they shared a rare understanding without words, neither of them completely comfortable with the tenuous peace that seemed to have emerged. Observing Lily pick up her bags and go out the door, Grant experienced a strange sense of grief as she disappeared down the corridor. When he got home that evening, he was more exhausted than he had ever been. With his mind racing with disorganized ideas, he collapsed back onto the couch. It never occurred to him before the quiet resolution Lily had, the dignity with which she conducted herself. He wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but for the first time, thinking back on how he had treated her, he felt something like actual sorrow. Not quite yet. He forced himself to focus instead on the bitterness he still felt toward his father, the shame of his situation, and the indignity of mopping floors after having grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth. Even so, when he dozed off, Grant couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this punishment than he had first recognized, as he continued to reflect on Lily and how she had remained strong in the face of everything. If only for the possibility that, in the end, he could have gained some knowledge from it. The next morning, Grant awoke to the same dull soreness in his muscles, but his outlook had altered. His animosity for Lily persisted, but it was tempered by a strange curiosity about her life and the outside world that he had never bothered to investigate. He didn't want to acknowledge it to himself, but he began to wonder what else he would find if he gave up trying to change the situation. He materialized at the mansion's service entrance just as Lily was clocking in her expression, that quiet, reserved one she typically wore without saying anything. When she delivered him the daily chore list, they got to work. Grant tried to keep up with her as they cleaned the guest rooms in the East Wing in the morning, hoping not to fall behind again. Grant started asking out of duty and curiosity. Asa result, "Your mother's condition has been chronic." Lily glanced at him, startled by his sudden attention, but then said, "Yeah, it started a few years ago," without hesitation. At first, it was just small problems, like fatigue and forgetfulness. Nevertheless, the doctor recognized dementia when the condition grew worse. She now needs care around the clock. Grant was silent, the weight of her words hitting home. He had never known what it was like to be the sole one responsible for a loved one through that, or to see them go through it. It was inconceivable for him to consider giving everything up for someone else. But it was Lily's reality. Every single day. "I'm sorry," he whispered quietly, and he meant it. Though he had nothing to say, he felt obliged to acknowledge her struggles for once. Lily nodded, taking his sympathy without mercy. "It's the nature of the beast. I'm just trying to make sure she's comfortable and has everything she needs. I'm limited to doing that." Grant felt strangely uneasy as they moved on to the next task, which involved polishing the marble floors in the main hall. He was forced to consider all of the things he had taken for granted. He thought about all the vacations his family had taken, the endless stream of get-togethers, and the constant solace of knowing that he could always get what he wanted by making a phone call. He had never once worried about finances, about getting by, or about when or where he would next eat. Meanwhile, in Lily's world, when missing even one payment could mean losing her house, every dollar counted. She was not permitted to ruminate on the future. Too busy to fully appreciate the moment. Later that day, during their break, in the garden situated behind the mansion, Grant watched Lily's expression as she gazed thoughtfully off into the distance. He followed her gaze to the edge of the property, to a small playground where he and his friends had played with his children. "Have you thought about leaving this place?" he asked. Breaking the silence is like setting off on a new adventure. Lily chuckled gently, but it wasn't a funny laugh. "I have thought about it, of course. Who hasn't? But no, it's too costly to start over, and I can't leave my mother behind because she depends on me. It seems like I've never really had the option." Grant nodded, a knot of shame in his breast. It was inconceivable that he would be subject to such restrictions and that his choices would be dictated by forces other than his own desires. Still, Lily had an unwavering tenacity about her that he found commendable. He realized that he had never really been himself. As they resumed their jobs, rather than criticizing Lily, Grant noticed that he was examining her more closely out of respect. He saw how she moved with quiet efficiency and how she maintained her pride, even in the face of performing things that most people would consider embarrassing. Despite everything, he knew she was stronger than her physical endurance. It showed a strong sense of character to persevere in the face of difficulty. By the end of the day, Grant's hands were blistered from hours of leaning over. He leaned heavily on the mop, wiping the sweat off his brow. He glanced sideways at Lily, who was still working, her face steady and controlled, as if the physical expense meant nothing to her. "Is it ever going to get any easier?" His voice was gruff and weary as he asked. Lily considered his question for a moment before answering. "Not much, but you get used to it, and sometimes you find small joys that make it worthwhile, like knowing you did a good job or making someone else's day happier." Grant nodded, trying to take it all in. His actual experience differed greatly from his definition of success, which he had always attached to the things he could buy and the locations he could visit. He realized as they finished for the day that he had never really understood what it meant to find meaning in something so simple. Grant followed Lily out of the mansion, feeling a weariness that transcended just physical tiredness. He had spent so much of his life following his own objectives and desires that he had never stopped considering the lives of people around him. By the time they reached the parking lot, he was seeing the world through a different lens for the first time and was beginning to doubt everything he had always taken for granted. Grant stopped, then went on. "Hi there, Lily. I know that I'm not worthy of your trust." Still, she turned to look at him and thanked him for not making things more difficult than they needed to be. There was a hint of surprise in her expression. For a few seconds, she seemed to consider whether or not what he had said was true. She gave me a small, almost tentative smile and added, "Don't thank me yet. Grant, there's still a long way to go." She turned and walked away, leaving Grant standing by himself in the last of the light. He couldn't escape the feeling that something had already started to shift in his life, something he couldn't quite put into words as he drove home that evening and watched the city lights blur past the windows. A strange kind of admiration welled up in him as he watched her walk away down the street. This was a lady he had so readily written off. Grant arrived at the estate earlier than usual the next morning. His mind was full of disturbing things from the last few days, and it was making him feel nervous and irrationally nervous. Having spent his entire life avoiding introspection, he realized that he needed to act after learning the truth about Billy's struggles and his own reckless actions. In the staff bathroom, he dressed in his uniform, mentally practicing his lines. He found it unusual to own up to his mistakes and take responsibility. But the more he thought about Lily's silent courage, the more he realized that he really ought to apologize to her. He took a deep breath and braced himself for what was about to happen. Grant saw Lily preparing for her morning routine on the east wing. She glanced at him as he approached, then returned to her meticulous cleaning of the window panes with an ease that appeared natural. This was the most Grant had felt in years, a twiddling knot of nerves in his stomach. Attempting once more, he cleared his throat, but the words stayed. He said, "Lily, can we talk for a minute?" His voice asked in an uncharacteristically uncertain way. She stopped and glanced over her shoulder warily. "What does it confer?" "Our itinerary for today is really full." Grant shifted and clumsily scratched the back of his neck. "I acknowledge that I never really apologized for what I did. This is something I only realized after giving it some thought." "Yes, I acknowledge that I have apologized in the past, but I wasn't really sincere." Lily straightened up and confronted him, her demeanor restrained, as if she wasn't sure if she should believe him or not. "Okay, so what has altered at this point?" Grant gulped hard, feeling the weight of her scrutiny and what he'd done to you. "It was untrue. It's unfair that I invited you to that meal to degrade you. I was able to see it before, but not now. You've gained strength and ability. I've consistently underestimated your potential. Sorry. Lily, I truly am." For a brief period, the only sound in the room was the soft whisper of the morning breeze coming in through the open window. Grant experienced a sense of vulnerability, as though he had exposed a side of himself that he had been too long hiding. Lily's expression softened slightly as she studied him, but he half expected her to ignore his remarks and go away without another thought. "Do you really mean that?" she asked with a tone that hinted at vulnerability. Grant steadied his gaze and nodded. Indeed I do. I want you to know that I'm trying to be better, and I apologize for everything I made you go through, even though I know it doesn't make up for what I did." Lily gave him a longer look as though she was searching for proof of insincerity. Then, with a slow sigh, her shoulders relaxed a bit. "Warm regards, Grant. Acknowledging your errors is a difficult task. I'm grateful, but that doesn't mean that we get along." I nodded once more, a sense of regret and relief at having to hold off on trusting you for a bit. "I realize that I won't be relying on your pardon right now. I did just that. I want to fix things, even if it takes time." Lily flashed him a small smile, one that was mixed with caution and an almost understanding expression. "All right. For the time being, I guess we'll see how that works out. Let's focus only on getting by today." As she went back to work, Grant experienced an odd sensation of relief in his chest. It was a start, even though it wasn't exactly forgiveness. Though he still had a long way to go, he felt for the first time that he was on the right track. They worked side by side all day, and their silence softened. Grant made a concerted effort to complete the tasks on time. He could feel her, observing him with the corner of her eye, as though trying to figure out if this newfound humility was a facade or more than that, as he did as Lily asked and obeyed her directive without resistance. During the lunch break that they were taking, Grant sat down across from Lily in the staff room. The other staff members had left, so they were by themselves in the peaceful area. Grant gave it some thought and decided to take a chance. "What actions had you planned to take? You know?" "Before all of this," he asked, gesturing vaguely in their direction. The question surprised Lily, who looked up and considered it for a second before shrugging slightly. I used to dream of being a teacher because I've always enjoyed teaching people new things. But when my mom got sick, those plans had to be changed. Now all I can think about is making sure she's okay." With a tinge of remorse for her unfulfilled dreams, Grant nodded slowly. He was made to think back on all the opportunities he had passed up, and the times he had dismissed the idea that hard work was something that other people just got. "You may come back to that later." He spoke, unsure if his words would be heard. "This is the perfect location for me to be for the time being," Lily said with a little, somewhat regretful grin. After the meeting, Grant felt strangely bashful. He realized that Lily had never gone after her own dreams in life. It had always been about looking out for others. Her mother's needs had always come before her own. That type of selflessness was beyond his understanding, but now he found himself admiring her. They returned to their jobs after eating their lunch. Occasionally, Grant would catch himself gazing at Lily and pondering how someone could be resilient in the face of such hardship. And even though he was still fighting his own pride and bitterness, by the end of the day, when they said each other farewell at the mansion's service door, he felt that something within of him had changed. Grant had a cautious sense of optimism. He watched Lily walk away, her feet methodical and steadfast, and quietly promised himself that even though she hadn't forgiven him completely, she had at least given him a chance. He was going to prove that he deserved that chance, no matter how long it took. The pattern that Grant and Lily followed for work steadily became more regular over a few weeks. Grant no longer battled as much since his muscles had grown accustomed to the physical demands of the job, and his clumsiness had diminished. The laborious tasks that had previously infuriated him now looked strangely comforting. Even though he didn't particularly enjoy cleaning windows or mopping floors, there was some satisfaction in the labor. As for Lily, she had started to warm up to the idea of finishing a project. Though she still kept her distance, she no longer treated Grant with the cold indifference she had when he first began working for her, and sometimes they even managed a few lighthearted conversations. Although there was no longer overt hostility, it wasn't quite friendly yet. It was something that was in the center, tentative and delicate. One Friday afternoon, as their shift was coming to an end, "I'm going to the farmer's market tomorrow morning," Lily continued, looking up at Grant. "Their fresh cuisine is priced quite well. If you're interested in following along, you're welcome to." Granted the invitation, he blinked in surprise. Lily had never before shown him anything resembling an olive branch. He hesitated, not sure if there was a catch, but then he saw the openness in her look, a tiny hint that maybe she was starting to think differently of him. Indeed, precisely. He tried to seem casual when he said, "I could use some fresh air." Lily nodded and shot him a sneaky glance before heading back home. As Grant watched her leave, he could not help but feel a sliver of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, he was getting over this. The morning after, Grant met Lily at the market, a bustling outdoor space full of Charleston's colors and sounds. Vendors were screaming about juicy tomatoes and fresh peaches, and families were walking between the stalls, their laughter mingling with the chatter of conversation. The air was warm and slightly saline from the nearby coast for the first time in a long time. Grant was at ease. He followed Lily throughout the market, watching as she skillfully negotiated with the vendors, a skill that both pleased and humbled him. She showed him how to pick the best apples, which vendors had the freshest greens, and how to spot a decent deal. It had never really occurred to him to think about it, but all of a sudden he was loving how simple it was. Once, they stopped by a food truck to get some lemonade and took a seat nearby. As they sipped their drinks, Grant glanced over to Lily, wondering how to ask the question that had been on his mind for a few weeks. "Why did you invite me today?" he asked. Finally, he remarked in a hushed voice above the din surrounding them. "You didn't have to endure what I endured after all that." "You're correct," Lily remarked, looking down at her lemonade with a thoughtful expression on her face. "I guess I think people can change if they really want to, because Grant, you're not the same person you were that night in the restaurant. I've seen you try, but I didn't have to." As Grant processed the reality in her words, his barriers broke down. Perhaps he had been wrong, he thought to himself now that he was sitting next to the woman he had tried to demean. He remembered all the times he'd denied that there might be a shift, believing individuals to be who they were. "I'm grateful that Lily gave me this chance. It means a lot," he continued, sounding remarkably sincere. "I am aware that I have a long way to go." Lily glanced at him, a small grin playing on her lips. "Take care not to destroy it, though." "Okay, I'm not going to try this on a whim." For a little moment, their soft laugh appeared to reduce their strain, meandering through the marketplace en route to return. Grant felt freed from the weight of his past wrongdoings and could now enjoy the sheer joy of being with Lily. Over the next few weeks, Lily and Grant continued to collaborate, but he also began to show greater interest in her life outside of the estate. One evening, after a particularly long shift, he offered to walk her home. They traveled through the older part of town where residences were smaller and closer together. She initially objected, but eventually gave in to his persistence. Their paint faded from years of exposure to salt air and sunlight. The neighborhood where Lily lived was significantly different from the gated community where Grant had grown up. He had never experienced the same warmth and sense of community. As they walked, Lily talked about the corner store that continued to offer her credit during hard times, the little park she occasionally went to sit in with her mother on sunny days, and the local cafe she worked at before taking the job at the mansion. Grant observed the subtleties of a life very different from his own in silence. When they got to her front porch, Lily turned to give him a contemplative gaze. "Absolutely," Grant said, offering her a half aisle and shrugging. "You didn't have to walk me all the way here, you know. I figured it was the least I could do." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Regards, Grant, and I'll talk to you tomorrow." As he made his way back through the empty streets, Grant was unable to identify the warmth he felt in his chest. It wasn't love, not quite, more like a connection, a sense that he was finally starting to understand what it meant to care for someone other than himself. The dynamics at work started to shift, and Grant noticed that the other workers no longer viewed him with the same mistrust as previously. He had gained the respect of the entire team in addition to Lily. He was far from perfect. He still made mistakes, and sometimes his arrogance threatened to return. But everyone could see he was making an effort. Grant couldn't resist asking Lily about her mother again in the afternoon as they were tidying up the library. "What fears do you have?" he asked. He talked softly about what would happen in the quiet of the room before pausing to dust an old bookshelf. "Indeed. Though I try not to think about it, I do it daily. It's only one day at a time, you know." Grant acknowledged Lily's concerns and nodded, appreciating that she had faced uncertainty he had never had to cope with. In different circumstances, he wondered how he would have handled it, but he was sure it wouldn't have gone as smoothly as Lily's. Months later, weeks had gone by. Grant and Lily spent more of these quiet, private moments together, growing to trust one another in surprising ways. There was still a long way to go, though. Grant could not shake the feeling that they were really building something that would withstand the dark ages. In ways he could never have predicted, Grant's life had become more routine. Every morning he would arrive at the estate early, change into his uniform, and begin working next to Lily. What he had once considered to be onerous activities had become almost meditative, a way to quiet his mind. Nevertheless, their time spent with Lily had had the biggest impact. He began to dismantle the walls he had built around himself. One cold morning, they were mopping the tiles in one of the mansion's less utilized bathrooms. Grant could not shake the thoughts that had been rattling about in his head. In the middle of cleaning, he stopped, bent over, and gave Lily a serious look. "Lily, may I ask you a question?" As he ventured, his voice sounded unusually tentative. Glancing up at him, she brushed stray hair from her face with the back of her gloved palm. "Indeed, what's happening?" Grant felt his own feelings pressing in on him hesitantly. "Are you genuinely of the opinion that individuals are capable of fundamental change?" Lily gave his question some attention and leaned back on her heels, her countenance serious. "Though it's challenging, I think that if someone really wants to change, they can. It's important to face the parts of yourself that you find offensive. That is challenging. The majority of people are afraid to take such a risk." Her words lingered in the air, and Grant felt the reality of them stab through him. He thought back to the conceited man he had once been, one who felt superior to everyone else because of his material wealth. That was a part of himself he had never questioned before. But all of a sudden, in the quiet moments between chores, he was breaking down those antiquated assumptions. "That's not who I just didn't want to be anymore," he said to himself in a quieter voice than he said to Lily. "I think I'm trying." Lily turned to look at him, her scowl softened at his candor. "Grant, you have to learn to be patient with yourself and other people. I know you're trying. Change comes gradually." Grant nodded, giving her words time to become clear. He knew she was right, but there was so much work ahead of him. He'd always thought that success meant having money and power, but now more than ever, he was starting to see how ridiculous those ideas were. He wondered if success could have another meaning entirely something unconnected to material wealth or social status. That afternoon, while they were finishing up the cleaning of the great staircase, Grant found himself watching Lily work, noting little things about her that he had never noticed before, like the way her face fell into a calm expression and the way she whispered softly to herself. Startled to realize that he had valued her not only for her strength, but also for her ability to maintain her kindness during her mother's speech. Under that admiration, beneath everything that life had thrown at her, he saw something else that had been slowly but surely germinating, like a seed in his heart. It was a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel before. However, this instance, in the quiet of the empty mansion, he could not dispute it. He was falling in love with Lily. As the realization hit him, a wave of hope and fear passed through him. He understood he had no right to expect her to feel the same way after everything he'd done. He couldn't help but look forward to their conversations, even when they were only talking about common subjects, and her smile made his heart skip a beat. While they prepared their belongings for return home, it was hard for Grant to talk. Every time he opened his mouth to say something to Lily, his own doubt ate the words away from his yearning to tell her how much she had changed him and how much he valued her. Rather, he began to ramble. "Hello? Do you think we should go have coffee sometime?" "Is not in the office." "Coffee." Lily looked astonished and turned her back on him. "You know, just to say what you want to say or not say." Grant spoke quickly as he felt heat build up the back of his neck. He made himself look her in the eye, even though he knew he sounded odd. Lily gave him a long, questioning glance as her countenance remained hazy. She bit the corner of her mouth into a smile, startling him. "Okay, Grant, coffee is nice." He let go of a breath he'd been holding, and a carefree smile spread across his lips. "Really wonderful. I'll find a beautiful location somewhere." Lily shook her head and smiled sarcastically. "It doesn't have to be a fancy Grant. It could be any regular coffee establishment." Grant felt a surge of warmth go through his chest. "Nothing spectacular, I understand." When they bid each other farewell that evening, Grant could not take his smile off his face. It felt like an invitation more than simply a simple cup of coffee. It appeared to be his chance to show Lily the kind of person he was trying to become. In the days ahead, Grant saw that he was thinking about Lily and how she had become accustomed to a pattern in his life more and more. He realized that all he wanted was to see her laugh and smile. Though he realized the chances were slim, for the first time he felt as though he was willing to accept the danger that she might never completely forgive him for the way he had treated her. The day they had their coffee date, wearing pants and a simple button-down shirt, Grant tried to look both polished and casual. Even though he had arrived a little early at the little cafe by the shore, his heart was pounding as he waited for Lily to come. When she arrived wearing a casual jacket and her hair pulled up, Grant felt a wave of warmth pass through him. She seemed more relaxed and real when she wasn't working. They started by ordering their drinks and choosing a peaceful table by the window where they could observe the boats floating by on the water. The conversation was a little stilted because they were both a little awkward in their new relationship. But eventually they fell into a routine and started talking about anything from childhood memories to their favorite books. It was Grant's dry sense of humor that let Lily relax and let down her guard a little. The sun was setting over the water as they finished their drinks, casting a warm glow across the cafe's windows. Grant didn't want the evening to end, but he knew he couldn't rush things. He had to gradually win Lily's trust. Gradually, when they were heading out of the restaurant, Grant turned to Lily, his heart pounding in his chest, and said, "Thanks for today. I found the day to be rather delightful." She smiled at him too, her face more reserved than he'd ever seen me. "Maybe we could give it another go later on." "Yeah, that would be nice," he said, a ray of hope flickering in his chest. As they parted ways with one another, there had been a small but discernible shift in their connection that Grant could not have missed. Even though he still had a long way to go, he felt for the first time that there could be something worthwhile to strive toward in the future, and he couldn't help but smile at the thought of what lay ahead as he wandered back through the quiet streets. Grant's life continued to take unexpected turns. By spending time with Lily and working together, he felt that he was discovering more about a new side of himself, one that was unaffected by wealth or social status. He began to realize that he liked their direct chats and the way Lily changed the way he saw the world. However, just as he was beginning to look forward to this new chapter, an inevitable flashback appeared. One afternoon after their shift at the mansion finished, Grant was surprised to see many of his old friends waiting for him in the parking lot. They sat idly on expensive cars, their chic sunglasses gleaming in the afternoon light. In a way, Grant was startled by how different they seemed to him after being away from them for weeks. "Hi, Grant. A long time has passed." "Essie," among the group. Kyle called out with a smile that nearly touched his eyes. "We imagined you were totally out of the loop regarding us." Grant forced a smile, but it was belied by a knot in his stomach. "Yes, I've been really busy." The way Lily kept her distance, as if preparing for the worst, Grant could tell she was reluctant, and he couldn't hold it against her. Glancing at Lily, who was standing a few feet away and watching the event with a doubtful face, the others exchanged knowing smirks. After seeing how his friends treated her at the restaurant, she had an excellent reason to be cautious. A man with the boys. Preoccupied with his act as the janitor, Eric laughed softly. "I have to admit that when we learned about your dad's little punishment, we shrugged it off." Nodding sarcastically, Kyle said, "Yes, but think about you. Grant is a floor cleaner and crew hanger, so who would have thought he would have given the position his all?" Grant clenched his hands at his sides, but he pushed himself to stay calm. He could feel Lily's eyes on him, trying to see how he would respond. He took a deep breath and met his friend's gaze. "Indeed, I swear to persevere, and you know what? Never before have I learned as much as I am right now. Saying goodbye to all of you." The smirks disappeared, to be replaced by confused and furious looks. Kyle crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Come on. Grant, man, we really are your friends. We've got your back. Act like you understand this humility lesson, but you don't." Grant shook his head, feeling a sharp surge of annoyance. "Since it doesn't feel like that. It feels like you're here to make fun of me, the same way we used to make fun of people like Lily, even though I don't want to be that person anymore." Eric rolled his eyes and sneered. "Whatever, man. If you want to throw away your life for some sob story, go ahead." Grant was about to respond when someone halted him, saying, "Don't expect us to wait around for you." Lily thrust forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's funny for people who think of themselves as his friends. You don't seem to respect his choices, for sure." Her words hung in the air for a minute, causing a stunned silence to descend. Grant's friends' features showed a mixture of disdain and disbelief as they observed Lily as if it were their first time. Kyle laughed in joke, though there was a trace of hesitation in his voice. "Who do you think you are? You really think you're better than us because Grant is helping you with this altruistic project?" Lily gave him a direct glance. "No, I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I know how hard success is earned. In addition, Grant is trying to get better. Maybe you should give it a try." Grant felt a sharp sensation of gratitude along with a constriction in his chest. He had never seen someone stand up for him like this before, much less someone he had hurt so badly in the past. He raised his head to look at Lily, holding her gaze and giving her a small, grateful nod. She mirrored his sense of stiffness in her shoulders with a composed look. Concerned about the shift in the group dynamic, Kyle and the others exchanged glances. Finally, Eric curved his lips into a smile and shrugged. "Let's head out, please. Grant is at liberty to squander his time any way he pleases." Without further word, they climbed into their cars, the engines roaring. As they drove out of the parking lot, Grant felt a strange mixture of comfort and grief settle in his chest. Even though he knew he had lost something connected to his past life, he felt lighter, as if a weight he had not been aware he was carrying had been lifted. She didn't have to address them in that manner, Lily realized as she turned to face him, and her demeanor softened. Grant shrugged, letting go of a breath he'd been holding without realizing it. Indeed I did. It's time for me to stop pretending that the person I was with was fine." They stood in silence for a short while in the midst of the empty parking lot, the long shadows cast by the afternoon sun on the concrete. Then Lily reached out and gave him a soft, consoling squeeze. "All right. I'm appreciative of what it's worth. You're growing as a person, which I think is fantastic." Grant met her gaze and felt a surge of warmth. At what she stated, "Warm regards. Lily, it means a lot coming from you." They strolled around the quiet streets after leaving the mansion together. Grant found himself speaking more freely than he had in years, talking about his early years, his relationship with his father, and the pressure he had always felt to live up to the Thomas name. Lily listened quietly, silently expressing the struggles they had faced, the little joys she had found along the way, and her mother's courage. As they walked, Grant realized how much he valued these conversations and how Lily had given him the courage to be himself without worrying about the consequences. Though he knew he had made a lot of mistakes, he felt that with each stride he was taking toward being the person he had always wanted to be. But behind the surface, a new fear had begun to grow. He became aware that he was falling in love with Lily and that his feelings for her went beyond admiration or respect. A part of him continued to worry that he was unworthy and would never truly be able to atone for the hurt he had caused, despite his desire to believe that he deserved another chance. And he knew that by telling her how he felt, he might break the fragile trust they had built. By the time they reached Lily's front porch, the first stars had begun to appear, and the sky had deepened to a rich purple. Lily turned to look at him and gave him a meaningful thank you for coming along for the walk. "Grant, it's helpful to have someone to talk to." Grant smiled. Something tightened in his chest that he could not quite place. "It's true that I'm glad we're tackling this." With a cheeky gleam in her eyes, Lily raised an eyebrow at whatever it was. "Like sweeping floors and putting up with your obnoxious friends." He chuckled. He shook his head. That kind of thing, indeed. For a short while, none of them desired to break the silence. But after a little while, Grant was left standing on the porch with a lot of unspoken feelings in his heart as Lily waved to him and went inside. On his way back, he wandered through the deserted streets. Grant came to the realization that he could either risk telling Lily the truth about how he truly felt, or he could carry on acting as though this was all about making up for his mistakes. Despite the fact that the idea scared him, he felt more alive than he had in years, as well as on his way home. Grant started to have hope that maybe, just maybe, one day he and Lily would be able to develop something real, something that was more rooted in the man Grant was becoming than in the past. Grant realized that he couldn't keep up his charade forever. While he accepted that he had changed, he also realized that others needed to see his transformation as well. To prove to her, and to himself, that he was sincere about bettering himself, he needed to step beyond the mansion's gates and take action. That's why he went to Richard's office a few weeks later with a suggestion. Grant felt uncomfortable standing in front of his father's enormous oak desk, but he forced himself to look him in the eye. "Something has crossed my mind." His voice became steady as he began to talk. "I want to organize a charity event to help others who don't have the same opportunities as us, and to give back to the community." Richard arched an eyebrow and looked up from his paperwork. This was a charity function, which is a little different from grant events typically. What led to this happening? Realizing he had to be honest, Grant paused and then said, I've seen how hard Lily works and how much she gives up for her mother. And it occurs to me that a lot of people might use a little assistance, just like her. I want to accomplish something important for once. Richard studied his son for a long while, his expression mysterious. Grant feared his father would not approve of the idea. But Richard leaned back in his chair and, with his face still crossed, gave it a serious look. I'll agree to this, Grant, but with one proviso. You must organize everything yourself. The staff cannot. If you want to show that something is important to you, you have to see it through to the end. Grant nodded. A wave of resolve and consolation passed over me. That's something I am capable of doing. I would like to participate in it. In the following few weeks, Grant put everything into organizing the charity event. He spent the mornings at the mansion working with Lily, and the afternoons calling, arranging donations, and liaising with local businesses. He tried to learn what the food banks, community organizations, and youth programs most needed and how he might help them. Lily watched his efforts with equal parts admiration and curiosity. She had never seen this side of Grant before, the one that cared enough to attempt and try to make a difference. One evening, while they were finishing up their cleanup after a long day, she couldn't help but worry. How do you intend to spend this important occasion? Grant grinned shyly, as if he were still getting used to discussing something he was proud of. A neighborhood fair, food vendors, kid-friendly games, and live music are all planned. The event's entire proceeds will go to local nonprofits, especially those that assist families similar to your own. Lily arched an eyebrow, impressed actually, extremely thoughtful. Grant, I never imagined you would make such progress. He shrugged his shoulders, attempting to contain his pride at her acceptance. All right. I guess I'm simply trying to make up for lost time because I want you to be there. It wouldn't feel right without you, Lily. Lily hesitated, clearly moving yet unsure. I'm not certain. Grant, I don't believe I would be very welcomed at a party like this. It's your universe more than mine. Grant shook his head emphatically. Real. No, it isn't anymore. Not just mine, and yours are on the line here. It's all about bringing people together, and I want your assistance. After a long moment of stillness, finally Lily pulled at her lips, grinning slightly, and said, All right, I'll come, but you better not make me regret it. Grant was a whirlwind of nerves on the actual day. He had never arranged an event of this nature before, so when he saw the venue, a local park filled with tents, vendors, and a small stage, he became quite nervous. But as the light dimmed and more began to show up, he began to feel hopeful. Maybe this might work. It just might. Lily showed in with a timid look on her face and modest attire a little after the ceremony started. Grant saw her from across the park, and his heart leapt for joy. He remarked, You made it, grinning broadly as he moved through the crowd. A wave of more relief swept over him than he cared to admit. It's a crowded area. Lily laughed under a faux serious mask. Yeah, I'm here, and it looks like you've done a pretty good job too. Grant surveyed the area, taking in the live performances by neighborhood musicians, the families enjoying the events, and the kids playing with face paint. He felt really proud of the way it had all come together. Indeed, I think we could actually pull this off. As the evening wore on, Grant and Lily went around the fair together, stopping at food vendors and chatting with some of the patrons. Lily gave Grant introductions to several of the local companies whose owners had sent items, and he provided her introductions to some of the families she knew. It was strange. The incredible merging of their two worlds made Grant feel as though this was all he had ever imagined. When the moment of truth was about to arrive, Grant took the platform, his heart pounding in his chest. He cast a sidelong glance at the gathering and noticed Richard near the back, his bearing solemn but proud. Lily was standing closer to the front, and he saw her too. With her arms crossed and a small smile of encouragement on her lips, she observed him. Grant cleared his throat and turned on the microphone. I'd like to thank everyone who attended tonight. As much as I have, I hope you derive enormous meaning from this experience. when I started getting ready for this. I had hoped it would have a different theme than generating money. I wanted to show that everyone should look out for each other, regardless of background. He refrained from speaking. They glanced in Lily's direction and met eyes for a moment. He saw the understanding in her eyes, the tacit acceptance of their shared development. I would also like to say that this event would not have been possible without the help and inspiration of a friend who has taught me more than I could have ever imagined. I'm thankful that I would learn. Grant became quite emotional as the crowd applauded. As soon as he got off the platform, "Grant, you performed admirably." With a timid smile, Lily welcomed him, her eyes gleaming with something that almost seemed like pride. "I'm grateful, Lily." At her words, Grant felt his heart lift. You understand how much more that suggests. When the event was coming to a close and the final contributions were counted, just as the last family started to depart the park, Grant and Lily just so happened to be sitting next to each other on a bench. The night air was brisk, and the stars had just started to peek out from behind the lowering gloom. A flutter of nervousness went through Grant's chest, and he turned to look at Lily. "Lily, I want you to know that I truly apologize for everything, even though I'm sure I've said it before, and that I'll constantly be working to do better." Lily met his gaze with a grave yet gentle expression. "You've come a long way, and I think you deserve it. But remember this. It's more than just proving your value to me or to anyone else. The secret is to be the person you want to be for yourself." Grant felt a knot rise in his throat as he nodded and admitted that she was right. Her comments struck a deep chord with him. "Thank you very much, Lily, for everything." Seated in comfortable stillness, they observed for a bit longer as the park filled up and night descended around them. Though he still didn't know what was ahead, Grant felt at ease and maybe realized that, possibly for the first time in his life, he was on the right track. Weeks passed following the charity function. Grant felt compelled to tell Lily how much he truly felt, that working with her had been more than just a lesson in humility, that his days together had become the best part of his life. He found himself looking forward to their quiet conversations, their easygoing moments together, and the tacit understanding that had grown between them. But his terrible fear of rejection kept him from expressing his true feelings. It was an October evening, cool after another long day at work. Grant asked Lily to walk with him along the waterfront. A hint of winter was in the air as the sun sank, bathing the sea in a golden hue. Lily hesitated for a bit before nodding inquisitively and blinking. "Yes, sir. Share your opinions with me." They only heard the soft waves as they walked along the coast. The weight of all Grant wanted to say finally came to him as he searched for the right words, and his heart started to race. He stopped, turned to face her, and took a big breath. "Lily, I have a lot on my mind these days, and I need to share it with you. Even though I know I don't deserve your pardon, and I don't expect you to feel the same way, I can't help but fall in love with you." Lily's eyes widened and her look turned to one of surprise. Grant quickly filled in the silence, saying, "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know I'm still learning, but I've never felt this way before being with you." His tone became increasingly urgent. "I am a different person now because of your lessons. Lily and I." The world seemed to stop for a little period, and Justin needed you to hear the words that were spoken in silence. Lily was staring at Grant, and he could feel her mysterious gaze. His chest tightened, fearing that pushing too hard might ruin everything. Lily took a deep breath and spoke in a quiet, collected voice. "There are no words left for Grant. I'm not sure whether I'm prepared for something like this, and this wasn't what I was expecting. Between the two of us, there is still a lot for me to sort out." Grant nodded quickly, trying not to show how unhappy he was. "Lily, I get it. Although I don't want to put any pressure on you, I really do. I just wanted to be very honest with you for once in my life." She glared at him for a long time before reaching out and giving him a small squeeze on the hand. "Warm regards, Grant. For telling the truth, it means a lot to me, but I need more time to sort through my emotions and make sure this is a true change in you." Grant mustered a smile and took a deep breath. "Lily, take all the time you require. I have no intention of leaving." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as they continued strolling, but the tension between them stayed unsaid. Grant could sense the hesitation in Lily's voice, the cautious withholding of her emotions. He worried deeply that he would never be able to truly win her over, even though he knew he couldn't push her. The next business day, despite their obvious tension, they both tried to push it aside and focus on their work rather than discussing Grant's revelation. As the afternoon wore on, Grant's anxiety grew and he started to long for a break from the doubts surrounding his relationship with Lily. But that distraction came in a form he hadn't anticipated. As things were coming to a conclusion, in the East Wing, Grant's gut twisted when he spotted Richard walking down the hallway toward them, his expression solemn. He pondered why his father was visiting the estate at this particular hour. "Grant, we have to talk." Richard spoke in a tone that discouraged discussion. His eyes shifted to Lily, becoming somewhat more empathetic. "Lily, could you just give us a little time?" Lily gave Grant a worried look and nodded before vanishing down the corridor. Grant faced his father once more and braced himself for whatever lay ahead. "What is this being used for, Dad?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Richard crossed his arms and stated, "I've been hearing rumors." His gaze was intense. "Give them credit for pointing out your growth and increased time spent with Lily. Close to her, is there any merit to that?" Grant was a little irritated, but he pushed himself to calm down. "Yes, there is. I have concerns regarding her father. She's helped me see sides of myself that I never would have noticed on my own." Richard's scowl deepened, a rare burst of feeling penetrating his hard shell. "Grant, this is what's going on, and I want you to know. Lily is a beautiful person, and I'm glad that she has had a positive influence on you, but you should think things through before acting. This is not your typical game." Grant shook his head, feeling his anger getting stronger. "I realize this isn't a game, Dad. That's the primary notion. I do have affection for her. My objective is to develop into the kind of person she would find worthwhile." Richard let out a breath, his shoulders drooping slightly. "Even if I believe you, son, you have to understand that this is about more than just you and Lily right now. In this town are our old friends. Our business associates refuse to acknowledge this. They'll wonder why you and she both did it." Grant felt the old tension of his past life pressing in on him, tightening his jaw. He knew that his father was right when he said that people they were connected to would not understand. He was aware, though, that he could never go back to who he had been. He said in a stern voice, "Let them talk. It makes no difference what people think. Grant, you've matured beyond my wildest expectations." After giving him a long, hard look, Richard let out a heavy sigh. "I care about you, and I care about doing the right thing. If this is really what you want, I will support you, but know that it won't be easy." Grant nodded. A weight was lifted off his shoulders. "It won't be easy, but I think it will be worth it." Richard gave him a rare smile and clapped him on the shoulder. "Okay, head over to talk to her. She's excited about your coming." When Grant found Lily, she was seated on a stone bench in the courtyard beneath the shade of an old oak tree. She looked up at him as he approached her expression. "Cautious yet hopeful, huh?" He took a seat beside her and spoke in a low voice. "My dad? He gave me a little reality check, but he also promised to support us if this is the choice we end up making." Lily asked, glancing across his face as she asked, "What do you want?" "Grant." Grant looked up at her and took a long breath. "I want to be with you, Lily. I want to earn your confidence so that I can continue to work toward being the person you helped me see I was capable of being." Save while all was going on, nothing could be heard save the sound of the wind rustling the leaves above. Then Lily reached out and took his hand in hers. Her expression was serious, yet hope appeared to temper it, and her grip was firm. "Give Oki a chance. Let's take it day by day and see where this goes," she whispered softly. Grant thought to himself, "One day at a time, I can manage that," and a smile appeared on his face. They sat there together for the first time, watching the sky turn pink and gold as the sun set beyond the horizon. Grant felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be, not because of who he was, but because of who he was becoming. In the days that followed, there was a cautious optimism. Working side by side, Grant and Lily were careful not to push things too quickly as their relationship grew into something more. They talked a lot about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Furthermore, in each and every conversation, though not everything was easy, Grant sensed his heart's walls beginning to crumble a bit more. True to Richard's warning, whispers among Charleston's social elite concerning Grant and Lily's courtship began to spread. At first, it was glances and comments from friends that bordered on being courteous. But the stories took off rapidly, and Grant had to deal with people he had formerly considered friends treating him with contempt. One afternoon, as Grant and Lily were having a break in the garden behind the estate, Lily brought up the rumors with a serious expression. I had heard some of the staff talking about them earlier. There have been rumors that some of your old pals don't like us. Grant shrugged, trying not to show how upset he was by the idea of people he had once trusted turning on him. Indeed. To be honest, I didn't think anything would happen. I don't care what people think anymore. Too many times in my life I've fretted about people like me merely because of my last name. I value you greatly. Lily, that's all that matters. Lily gave him a brief moment of attention before reaching out and giving his arm a gentle pat. You know this. In this war, you are not by yourself. This is something that unites us. Grant feels a warmth that he hasn't felt in a while as her words cause his chest to tighten. He placed his hand over hers and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Yes, I am conscious of it. And it's what makes everything different. Over the weeks, the regimen became almost second nature. Grant earned the respect of his co-workers as he continued to work at the residence. He learned that he was proud of the small things, like keeping a room tidy and helping Lily with tasks that required a little more strength, via his diligence and humility. Over time, he started to feel more comfortable in this new life than he had in the world of luxury and privilege. One evening, when they have finished their shift, Grant and Lily walked together down to the beach. The sun was setting and casting a golden glow over the waves, making the air feel crisp and cold. Grant felt a feeling of tranquility sweep over him as they lounged on the beach and enjoyed the calming sound of the waves. Gazing upon Lily's countenance, he was moved to divulge a matter that had been troubling him for several weeks. Lily, I wanted to let you know that I'm here for you no matter what, even if I recognize that we've opted to take things gently. I'm ready to wait for however long you need me to. As Lily looked up at him, he saw a range of emotions in her eyes, skepticism, hope, and a hint of something more. The colors of the fading sun were reflected in her eyes. Grant, you've come a long way and you clearly want to improve, but I need you to understand that trust is a hard attribute to get back. Grant nodded, reaching out to take her hand in his. I know, and I don't want to put any pressure on you to start right now. I'm not unique. I'm grateful for the chance to be by your side, even though it may take some time for you to completely trust me. Squeezing his hand a little, Lily grinned a little and said, You're doing pretty good so far, and I like this new you, Grant. I admire how you're beginning to develop. As the sun went below the horizon, they sat for a long time, watching the sky and its shifting pink and orange tones. Grant realized that he was exactly where he wanted to be, in addition to being with Lily. After spending so much of his life attempting to fit into a mold that had never really fit him, it appeared as though he was finally starting to become the person he could be proud of. The morning after, Richard called Grant into his office to have a conversation. With a sense of calm that had not left him in months, Grant entered. Richard looked up from his desk and gave a sporadic smile. I'm in shock at you. Grant. Richard sat back in his chair and started talking. When I first gave you this assignment, I wasn't sure if you would take it seriously. But now that I've seen the difference in you, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Grant felt his father's words tighten a knot in his throat. Greetings, Dad. That is very important. Richard nodded and was extremely serious. I know you have faced some challenges with locals, especially ex-friends who disagree with your choices. You have my support even if they find it hard to accept the person you're becoming. It's possible that they were never really your pals in the first place. Grant smiled. A weight was lifted off his shoulders. Finally, I think I'm starting to realize it, and that's okay. When you leave the office, Grant felt a sense of closure he didn't know he needed. He reflected on the pompous, self-centered man he had been at the start of it all, someone who was certain of his superiority over everyone else, as he walked through the mansion's hallways. But now he saw that real strength did not come from demeaning others. It was meant to inspire them. Later that night, he and Lily sat on the back porch of the mansion, watching the stars emerge one by one. Lily was laying on him, her head on his shoulder, and Grant felt a warmth that resisted the nighttime cold. "You know this. I had thought that nothing in my life would ever change," Lily said softly, but as if I would be stuck in the same routine just trying to get by every day, with a hint of surprise in her voice. "I think maybe things are starting to get better." Grant smiled, extending an arm over her shoulders. "Indeed. They are, in my opinion, and I'm glad I can contribute to that." They stood there for quite a while as the light went out and the darkness stretched out about them. Grant felt more hopeful and full of opportunity than he had ever felt before. Over the following few months, we were in for both fresh challenges and delights. In addition to his responsibilities at the estate, Grant continued to volunteer in neighborhood community centers because he found joy in helping those in need. Lily was able to dedicate more time to her long-standing goal of becoming a teacher after her mother's health improved. She even enrolled in night school to achieve this goal. And in the process, their relationship grew closer, founded on honesty, respect, and the understanding that they just needed to keep trying. Neither of them needed to be perfect. One evening, as they strolled hand in hand through the streets of Charleston, Grant looked at Lily and felt a surge of gratitude as he realized how much she had changed his life. "Lily, thank you. I know I've said this 100 times, for giving me the chance to believe that I may be someone different from who I was before."
Lily squeezed his hand and a soft smile spread across her face.
"You most definitely deserve this chance. Grant and I are glad I took a chance on you as well." They came to a stop on the coast and stared out over the city, which had seemed so little to them both a moment before, but now seemed full of possibilities, the future stretching out before them. Grant recognized that they had found something much more than they had ever imagined, something that went well beyond forgiveness or second chances. They had crossed paths with each other,